It might take a couple of seconds to kick in, but we are going live. All right, and we are live. We are all the way live. Yeah, usually a couple seconds, let people get in the building if they're gonna be in here. Uh, but yeah, we definitely live in the building. Um, all right. So peace, y'all. Baragani, Islam, Salam, Hetepu, Rahubat, Jinolakum Nani, Chief Noble Bandeli Elamine, back again in the building. And today, I finally got my brother on the line today, man. We've been trying to get him. This is my brother. He's an author of several books, including I think it's African Origins of Christianity, and he is my friend and my fellow spiritual classmate. Give it up for Amen Maat Ra.
I want to say peace and blessings. Blessing to finally build with the God. I'm glad we can make this happen and everything, share information with the community like we did back in the day.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It definitely has been a minute, man, but I'm definitely glad to have you on here, man. And so today's topic, we'll be discussing how did our ancestors look at nationality and race. Okay, so brother Amin Ra is going to discuss his understanding of what was going on in ancient times as far as nationality, race, and creed, and building on that. We also, but before we get into that, y'all, I'm gonna check out check out all of the books, all of my books on Amazon.com. Got the nationalities, more is more by man, redemption. We got the Treaty 2 book, the nationality. Got the new book, the birth certificate explained, so check it out. And we also got the blank journal. I got my journal right here. I got my own blank journal right here, and it's 200 pages of blank pages for you to do all your writing and your notes and everything. So you can check that out. Also, I want to pull your books up, brother, so they can see your books as well. I'm in. It should be right. I hope it's. Let me see. Like I said, the brother is an author of several books. Yep, here we go. So it's got on Amazon. You can get his books too. He has the Amen Ra Illumination Volume 1. He has the Ancestors Surround Us. Is this your newest book right here? Right?
Yes,
the Ancestors Surround Us. Oh yeah, okay. So I got to get that book, man. But you can check out his latest book, and like I said, the Roman Illusion that explores the African origins of Christianity. He got the Amen Ra Illumination Volume 2, and he's got the Exploring the Hidden Origins of Islam. All that, okay? So you can check all these books out on Amazon as well. All right, so without further ado, man, we're going to get into this, man. I'm just really glad to have you on the show, man. It's, Amen Maat Ra is very versed in African history, dealing with Kemetic history and dealing with West African history as well. So, we're gonna, we're gonna have you on a lot more on this show. But for now, what I'm gonna do is get started with your background on the nationality and ancient nationality. So one of my first questions, man, for you is we're talking about understanding nationality because as Moors on this end, we often talk about nationality. So my question to you is: did our ancestors understand nationality?
Yes. I would say from, our primordial beginnings, when we start seeing an organization of families and a confederacy start to form among these families, as more needs and demands came about, you see this cauldron being created by traditional African tribes, traditional African families, with the need to have certain fundamental rights, protections, and particularly to distinguish themselves from others. In particular, like in the case for Kemet, part of the culmination of these tribes of people And the formulation of the term Kemet was to address these issues and to establish a foundation for nationality. Because when you talk about I'm fumbling around through my notes. When you talk about the word Kemet, it refers to an innovative. It's more of an ethno-geopolitical national marker. So it sets the standard for identity that was primarily forged, and basically, like if you could imagine witches with a cauldron, and Kemet, what we would call nationality, started in what you could imagine as a witch's cauldron, and everybody contributing their desires, their wants, what they wanted to see manifested in a tangible reality in the name of Kemet. So a lot of it came from there, as you could imagine, like when you have a confederacy of families and tribes or whatever, you have a lot of internal contradictions and politics of what is referred to as the first intermediate period. So, in the history of ancient Egypt or Kemet, an intermediate period is essentially a time of chaos, turmoil, confusion, and civil unrest, where people are not sure where food, water, shelter, security, organization, and what today, as modern people, the provisions that you would get. So nationality, that's what Kemet represented from the first intermediate period after you have the first dynasty, and you start to see the people come together and have more and more needs that need to be met consistently. So it was innovative in two fundamental ways. So when you see what became the name Kemet, it was a representation of the innovation of a unitary concept of one nation, the political need to more rigidly distinguish themselves as a nation of people, which is this is clearly shown in like the hyper discourses that you have in early Kemet about borders and territories. So you see from an early footing in the history of Kemet, this strong desire of the people participating as citizens and participating in the foundation of nation building, the the demarcation of borders and certain standards so you can actually distinguish yourself as a nation on the landmass from others that are cohabitating or migratory tribes that haven't set forth to lay down nation building principles. So a lot of these borders are internal borders within tribal context or the people that became Kemet, and externally. So you can make a clear marker for an actual national identity. So initially, it was primarily directly against the people. Believe it or not, a lot of what inspired nation building in the sense of Kemet was them trying to distinguish themselves from the Asiatics. So this is when you see this push of Kemet, of the word, the term Kemet was in part response to separating themselves from Asiatics. So you can make a distinguish from traditional African culture, traditional African views, morals, ethics, and standards of living from what we see in particular, the people of Western Asia. And that's in that first intermediate period. So a lot of these claims, arguments, or hypotheses about Kemet, like many other scientific disciplines, it has to be able to withhold, or survive intense scrutiny. So what we've been presented as a definition for the term Kemet in all of your traditional texts is that Kemet is a reference to either you have one school of thought that says Kemet means land of the black race, or the black land, or land of the Negroes. And then you have the second definition from the second school of thought. The first school of thought by which I must first mention was promoted by Sheikh Anta Joke or whatever, our classical African scholar or whatever. He presented in his works that the land Kemet referred land of the black race. And then you have the second argument that's more out of the camp of Theophilo Benga. And these are some common misnomers that even our Afrikaner scholars make mistakes on. So what we came to do is through comparative linguistics, a historical survey, going through the actual account and records in the annals of Kemetic history, in particular Pharaonic Kemet, the Middle Kingdoms, and the Older Kingdoms, and seeing firsthand primary attestations of the use Kemet. And the first thing we learn is that the term Kemet has absolutely no connotations, no connection, no reference to black skin, a black race, or black land that is a reflection of melanated peoples. The first thing that we need to
Huh.
start in the discourse of Kemet, and the reason why a lot of scholars give praise to Kemet, not because they're trying to say that we, as primary descendants of West and Central Africa, that we're them. The discourse is the talk about it. Kemet is great because it was a hub, a beacon for black excellence all around, neighboring around Kemet. So you see representations of Eastern Africa, Western Africa. You see a melting pot of that represented in Kemet. And the first thing we learn about the name of Kemet, when you go into the actual historical record, the name Kemet is a reference to a habitable land. Our ancestors did not identify themselves as you would a box of crayons and a box of Crayola. They didn't look at themselves, marginalize themselves, minimalize themselves, limit the expectations, limit the possibility of their children by putting them in the box and labeling them like cattle or we didn't look at ourselves as chattel property as Europeans did. So I think the first thing that we do when we look at classical civilizations is we retroactively go into ancient indigenous cultures, post-colonial period, and we retrofit, take the mind state, the outlook of the European, the oppressor, systematic slavery, the mentality our slave masters had, and we retroactively go back in time and say that because Europeans, the Greeks, the Romans, the Portuguese, the Germans, because they had this particular purview on race, we're going to go back several thousand years in history and place this same ignorant, dysfunctional, self-destructive view of humanity on this population. Where in fact, when you see references to Kemet, nowhere in the actual catalogs, you won't find any attestation that compares Kemet to black skin. And when you and a lot of things, because I go through, it's a systematic. The book is, believe it or not, is a systematic breakdown. So first we break down the glyphs that form the term Kemet as a toponym, because the first thing we need to understand is that when you use the word Kemet, it's not an actual title, it's not a name. When you're dealing with nationality and principles of nation building, the term Kemet is a toponym. A toponym is a place name. A toponym is what nation builders deal with. People that deal with nationality and standing on their nationality, participating in the nation as a civilized, natural person, they have toponyms. A toponym represents the ideology, what you expect to come from the nation that you build and that your families participate in. And what we find is when you look at all the primary sources of Kemet, that even when you compare the name of Kemet and other related African languages, you find that the name has nothing to do with race. And when we do find terms that refer to quote unquote blackness or color, they have specific glyphs that go behind them. They're called classifiers to distinguish the difference between what a civilian would say and what somebody participating in the nation would say. So the Remechu, which is what they call themselves, the people, they stood strongly on what they called ity, ity. That term means sovereignty in Kemet. Their focus was sovereignty. Ity is the term that they use as transliterated from the glyphs. That was their term for sovereignty. So their primary focus was to participate with certain inalienable rights and nationality and have status so they could interact with other nations, be respected by other nations, and interact, do businesses, enter treaties, establish trusts, whatever it may be. And that is in your proprior persona. They never identified themselves as race. And to go a step further, when I go into this, when you go into the primary sources, not only do you not hear any state politician, no Nisut Biti. Nisut Biti is the actual title of a pharaoh or king in Kemet. When you go to the divine, the Seshu, which are the actual scribes or whatever, of the kings or whatever, not once will you ever find a reference of racial connotations associated with the toponym Kemet. What you will find is that the term Kemet is a primarily, first and foremost, is a reference to a land that is irrigable and has water. So the first time when you see the word Kemet, a lot of times, and this is interesting, like when you analyze and scrutinize the Medu Neter hieroglyphic language of Kemet, a lot of times when there is confusion linguistically for a definition, specifically when you're dealing with terms of nationality, when you're dealing, especially in the actual writing script of Pharaonic Kemet, how the scribes wrote it because they were nobles too. They had a status. They took a title of nobility. They would never dethrone themselves and associate with a colorable label such as I'm a black person, I'm this. But in the language, often when you can't understand what a toponym means, uh, you can look at the inverse of the word, meaning a lot of times there were different dialects of it, and so you would have the word Kemet, but the inverse would simply be the word backwards. So when you say that, when you take the word Kemet, like you have the actual term Mahet, which is a reference to an irrigable land, a marshland. So the term Kemet, in its most fundamental definition, is a reference to a land that has water and you can irrigate. So the minute you hear the word Kemet, it's a reference to a source that has potable water. There's drinkable water. There's a river. You can set up irrigation. And in this, and through this, the first chapters I set that up because this ties in, the term Kemet also ties into science, technology, engineering, geology, hydrology, being able to create irrigation symbols. And if you look at the classifier at the end of the name, the term Kemet, it looks like to illustrate it. I didn't bring a picture, but it's a circle with an X. That circle with an X is symbolically an irrigated land. That's a village, and those X's are marks of irrigation. And in it, I showed other scholars, other researchers that have also come to these same conclusions by actually researching the firsthand primary sources that were carved in monumental temples, things of this nature on various papyri that express the Remetu or the ancient Egyptians their notions of what nationality was and what it should be for the people.
Man, that's heavy, man. I was about to try to pull up the symbol. Let's see if I pull it up real quick, man. Because you were saying Kemet, I've always learned that Kemet meant fertile land. So that is that like an understatement
Yes,
or
because technically, in a sense of water, but primarily, Kemet would the term Kemet. I would say the best way to describe Kemet would be a riparian land, meaning that there's ample water and everything, so you can set up a basis. And a matter of, okay, this is one because this is a newer way of spelling Kemet. But in my text, I give you the older inscriptions of Kemet, and instead of the image that you see on the bottom, the Nuit symbol, instead of that Nuit symbol, traditionally Kemet is spelled with an irrigation canal, and I show that in my text. I'll have to send you some of the pictures. And one of my other pictures, because another name for Kemet is Tameri, and
right.
it features the term Tamiri. I'm trying to see if I can go pull up some pictures or whatever. It actually, which means
Yeah,
the
pull it
beloved
up.
land. Tamiri actually features a water well glyph in it, and it's as a classifier. A classifier which used to be called a determinative. They're the same thing. A classifier in a Medu Neter hieroglyphic script is a is a hieroglyph that you put at the end of a term to give you finality on what the term means, and to let you know what topic, what field of study, and what grammatical reference. Here, this is a great example. Here we have the land Murray, the beloved land, and at the top, above the traditional symbol for Kemet, above it is a pool glyph referring to a body of water. And it's important to start showing different pictures. So when we visualize what Kemet meant, we understand that our people were practical. Our people focused on nation building. Racial connotations, racial identity was not in the mind of the nobility class that established Kemet. The chieftains, the nobilities, the everyday people, they didn't identify themselves. In Kemet, populations were identified and primarily recognized by their trade, their skills, their predisposition. If you had a group of people that were disingenuous and they were known for swindling, their title will reflect that. They were identified by skilled trades. So if you ran into a tribe and they specialize in healing through, they were herbologists. So they were able to manufacture and process certain plants that other parts of Africa weren't aware of. They would be recognized for that. So you would be judged, populations were judged by their merit or lack thereof, or what they could actually contribute in the process of nation building. So if you had a group of stonemasons, their identity or the term that you would use to identify them would be based on that. Like with in amongst Kemet, they're archers, the magi. The terms that they use, and even in the glyphs and the spelling, would give you a symbol to let you know what they were known for. Like with the magi and the hieroglyphic spelling, a symbolic glyph of a bow that the warriors used would be included. So you had an idea of what was going on. And if we look at all of the various manifestations, because in this text, I analyzed the term Kemet before they were actually recognized for the pyramids, because prior to that, even before the term Kemet and Murray, you had terms in Kemet, and I share that in the book, where the term that identified what later became Kemet, the reference was that to mound builders, because before the pyramids, Kemet, that land, I get into this. I get into old Kemet, the long before Kemet. I give you the terms of Kemet before it was Kemet, like when it was Tawi, and the old, it was a completely different outlook.
Are you talking about like pre-dynastic Kemet?
No, this is like early dynastic,
Okay.
because roughly when you say the term Kemet, if I'm not mistaken, that's like the seventh, the 10th dynasty. No, I'm sorry, the 7th dynasty. You start seeing the promotion of the term Kemet being introduced into the lexicon of the Medu Neter. Prior to that, you had references to Kemet as Kenu, and that is one of the older terms for Kemet. Long before it was called Kemet, you had the reference to Kenu, and it was spelled with the skin of a sacrificed goat or whatever, and everything. So even and through this book, systematically, I go through the original terms, and I provide the glyphs and the translations and the evolution of the actual hieroglyphic symbols as they appeared in Pharaonic Kemet and recorded by the Seshu, which is just a term for your royal scribes and things of this nature or whatever, to show that through the evolution of Kemet throughout the dynasties, one thing remained constant. There was no racial references. There was no, as a matter of fact, if you go into the primary sources of Kemet, you can't find any racial epithets, especially amongst how they identified themselves and interacted with themselves. Nowhere in the history of Kemet will you find a citizen, a natural person that is part and participating in the actual government of Kemet refer to another melanated human being as a Negro, or a human being that's merchandise with black skin. Nowhere will you find any jokes where there's colorism and you see one African citizen cracking jokes on another African citizen that's a citizen of Kemet in a derogatory way, making jokes about their skin tone. You don't find any of this. All of the trappings that we see in European civilization, with us being marginalized to shadow property, 14th Amendments, and assuming fraudulent colorable titles such as a black person, a Negro, an Afro American. The minute you add that hyphen to your name, you're separating yourself from something.
I
People
got
in
you.
Kemet, the Remetu would never say, "Well, I'm a black Kemetic. I'm a brown. I'm a brown Kemite. I'm a brown Remetu. You got to respect me, but I'm different from the other Remetu. I got dark skin." It's a very strange concept, especially when you look at the fact that if you look at the neighbors to Kemet, they're defiantly darker than them. The Sudan and the neighboring tribes around them are clearly of a darker hue than them. So it really wouldn't make sense to name a nation, this is the black nation, but everybody surrounding you is darker than you. You know what I'm saying? When you look at the Nilotic Africans deeper and all that, let's say, especially when you get deeper into Sudan, and then that because when we talk about Nubia, I hate using that term because that's a European term, but Taseti,
Okay.
as the ancients called it, and these people were called the Nahisi. So and the plural term was the Nahisiu. So the Nahisiu, which are the progenitors of Kemet, the Nahisiu, you would never see any, even in their older phases, early phases, I should say, establishing what would be the Nahisiu, or what we call the Nubians. You see no references to race or taking on a colorable title to identify yourself when you're doing transactions or interacting with other tribes, other civilized nations at all. You do not see that. If race was brought up, it was merely perhaps as a descriptor, but not as a defining term or a title that you enter into a nation or you interact with other civilizations with. Our
Okay.
ancestors, whether it be the Nahisiu, the Nubians, or Kemet, you can't find any peace treaties with them identifying themselves as Negro, identifying themselves as Black, having a sense of being, uh, as a good example of brainwashing. James Brown, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud.
Right.
James
Right.
Brown wouldn't be able to perform that song in Kemet.
Just wanted to say, y'all check out, like the video, and subscribe to the channel as well. Y'all hit that, smash that like button. All right, go ahead, man. I just had to throw that in
So
there.
yeah, so like
What
our
you were saying as
famous.
far as the black,
Right. So our famous classical musician James Brown, he would not be able to come in Kemet and perform that song and be embraced. They would look at that man like he's crazy. They would look at James Brown and say, "Thank you for coming out. Here's your check. We would like you to leave before you finish your concert. We thank you for coming, but the door is that way. You go find these Negroes you're talking about and you perform to them. But we would like you to leave because we don't know who you're talking about. This race these people that you have created, we don't identify with that. So you need to go find them, and I'm sure they would love to hear your concert, but not us." And that becomes the foundation. So believe it or not, although I didn't go into intentionally with this project focused on nationality, racial perceptions, and things of this nature, it ended up in that because I had to go through the primary sources, the comparative linguistics, and showing how other African languages that have inherited part and parcel the Medu Neter language, and they carry on the language of Kemet, they don't incorporate these ideas either.
so let me ask you: would Kemet look at other countries as racial, or would they look at them in another way?
They would look at them based on their national status and their standing with them. Most of how Kemet interacted, they would judge you based on how you basically participated in treaties. Were you honorable in our deals and interactions? When we had any type of business interactions, uh, dignitaries. whether it be someone setting up a trust or entering into a particular contract. Do you honor your contract? Are you faithful to it? Can we trust you? When we enter into peace treaties, will you value that? And exchange of goods and things of this nature on an international market. So we have another misnomer I deal in my book where a lot of times in the Afrocentric community, you have people teaching on Kemet, and they say that the term Tamahu is a reference to Europeans, and that's false too. Tamahu just refers to somebody that's a citizen of Libya, or they've been naturalized and they have the mind state of a national citizen of Libya, and they carry on the values of those who are in Libya, and they enact their nation building principles. When they come to Kemet, they try to impose the status or the culture of Libyans onto us. So even when you look at the term Tamahu, it's a reference to a nationality and a national outlook. There's no racial connotations in there. The only thing you'll see is geographical connotations to the particular areas in Libya that they either had good standing with, far as on government and business conduct, or they had bad standings because they were raiding, they had demonstrated bad character, they enter into contracts with bad faith, they get goods that they needed from Kemet, but in return they didn't fulfill their part of the bargain.
I got you. I got you. So that leads me to asking, where do you think this whole colorable, these crayons and all that thing, where do you think that started?
Well, I would say it started honestly. In reference to our original African scholars like Sheikh Anta Diop, Dr. Ben, and things of this nature, we'll have to remember that at the time, even Dr. Ben spoke on this. Prior to him, we were demonized through history. So there's this whole push to say that, and here's another argument I deal with in the book, because before you deal with Kemet, you have to deal with this whole Afro-Asiatic phenomenon, the Afro-Asiatic myth, as I call it. So
Ooh.
proponents such as oh my god, this is a slippery all right, this is going down.
Hey, do your thing, man. Let them know. Hit them up. Hit them up. Hit them
So
up.
you got the Afro-Asiatic phylum and their proponents and creators. The Afro-Asiatic theory suggests that it was not Africans, melanated, what we would call black Africans, black humans, indigenous peoples. The argument of Afro-Asiatic is that they themselves, the indigenous African people, did not create Medu Neter. They were not the indigenous creators of the language. It was biracial, light skinned, interracial peoples. And then later, indigenous, dark skinned, dominant, genetically dominant people later learned from them. I go through it. I go through all the primary authors, how the Afro-Asiatic language. It's not even a real phylum. Afro-Asiatic is just it's it's a it, it's a topological analysis. So imagine me, you're Africa, your land is Africa. I'm the European. I come in and I see you and your brothers, you and three of your friends, and then the rest, they ain't your friend. You don't even know them. And so, like, several of you all happen to have the same color shirt on. You're all wearing some shade of blue. So I say, instead of asking you, like, okay, do you know him? Do you know him? Do you know him? The Afro-Asiatic is topographical. It just takes general ideals, general surface level features, and it lumps them all in together and says, okay, you're all a family, just at the surface level. You got on the same color shirt, you look like you have the same name brand of jeans, so you all must be family. And that's essentially what a topological feature is, a surface level feature, and then you try to build a foundation based on that. So out of Afro-Asiatic, they also try to pair up genetics and things of this nature. So this is why you see a push saying that the original inhabitants of Kemet were either Caucasians or they were some type of light-skinned interracial peoples. So dealing with this fact, civil rights movement, post-civil rights, There were times where African scholars could not even go and get a lot of this primary source information as being African descent, especially African American, you would be denied access. So a lot of the rhetoric with, especially saying Kemet means black race and identity with being a Negro and things of this nature, was simply a rebuttal saying that it was African peoples or genetically dominant melanated humans that laid forth the foundation for civilization in Kemet. So what you saw was they unknowingly trying to combat systematic racism and put on the record that black humans laid down for the foundation for Kemet. And in the midst of doing that, they put out false information with the definition of Kemet. So the minute you take on that moniker of being colored, black, Negro, 3/5 human being, and you're subject to all the trappings that come with it. You can't take one without taking all the other, and that's something a lot of our scholars they neglect that. You just can't clip one piece that suits your narrative and then all the historical baggage that comes with it. You say, well, that doesn't count anymore. It's like wrong. So we saw that presented. A matter of fact, Sheikh Abdul Diop, and a beloved scholar. I'm from the Diopian school of thought. However, what we're not aware of, and I'll give you the information where you can see this. Sheikh Abdul Diop really he drove it home for the Afrocentric community that Kemet meant black. He submitted this in General History of Africa, which is part of UNESCO. It's an international team of indigenous African scholars, the best scholars in Africology, the field, all the fields of African studies and history. They all come together and have symposiums. Sheikh Anta Diop presented this several decades ago. However, although his work saying Kemet equates to land of the black race, his notion, his just in this specific topic, everything he submitted was openly rejected by all of the African scholars because they identify with nationality. And this can be found in the Cairo Symposium. You can request this information from the United Nations. And this is in the Cairo Symposium on the Peopling of Africa. There was a major symposium of all of your top indigenous African scholars and the scholars on the field of Kemet, what the place name meant, the history of Kemet, deciphering primary source glyphs and things of this nature. And they had a major symposium. And at the end of the symposium, after Sheikh Anta Diop and his supporters presented their information, it was tolerated because of the times, because we needed to know what these people looked like. They were of African. But his notion that an advanced race of melanated humans would stoop to the level of stripping themselves of their identity, their creed, their nationality, and all praises to their ancestors by saying, "Look at me, I'm just like that crayon. You see this other property that you can go buy, purchase, and sell? I'm just like that." Our ancestors would never stoop to that level. That is an embarrassing way to present yourself to other nationalities. Because when you say you don't have a nation, you're saying that you're homeless. Who runs around saying that I'm homeless? I'm an orphan. I don't know who my mother is. I don't know who my father is. Without nationality, you are essentially homeless. You are a
Right.
refugee. You are running from one place to another, and you have to live at the expense of a sovereign. And that's just simply how the way life is. Although we use different terms for this or whatever, even in today's political climate, and as you see as Kemet progressed, you could not simply interact as a free roaming tribe, a free roaming people with no rules, consequences, without having some type of protection and covering by a sovereign or some type of nobility class that had a nation that could represent you, protect you, and provide you with fundamental resources and inalienable rights so you could go on and prosper and have another generation. Without nationality, there's little to no progress. You can only go so far by yourself. So our ancestors
Facts.
understood that. And to separate yourself from a nation, typically you would have terms in African and traditional African languages that if you didn't have a nationality, you were essentially homeless. That was the equivalent. You had nobody to take care of you. And we hear how terrible the stories are of a lot of children who end up in orphanages and things of this nature. It that the suffering doesn't stop because you're an adult. You don't have you
Right.
have no nation in times of duress and times of unrest. In Kemet, like I said, they had periods of turmoil and everything. They saw what happened when there's no national, when there's no standing nation, organized nation to protect the fundamental needs of the women and children. They saw what happened, and to turn your back on that and to take on a colorable title. Where can you go in the United Nations if something like with Brittany Griner, she gets in trouble, she goes to the consulate or whatever? Does she go and say, well, I need the nation of Negro to help me? I need this black nation to. There's nothing that she understands how she does now. You know,
They don't even have the LBGT community. They ain't
exactly
even.
right. You know, she was speaking out against standing for the flag. Now she wants the flag to stand for her. But the people, when they get in trouble, they understand this. We all act confused about nationality until there's something extreme and your safety, your freedom is on the line. Our ancestors understood that without having to get in knee deep in it. We inherently understood the principles and importance of nation building to further our children and provide a situation where they can flourish. Because without nation building, you're in limbo. You're at the whim of something, especially if you're surrounded
Right.
by other nations that have a
Right.
nobility class, that have sovereign peoples. You're going to be at their eventually. You're going to be at their whim because in order
Right.
to move, conduct, do commerce, travel safely, you need a nation behind you. That representation is important. So to step away from nation building and participating in a nation, to step down from that and now identify yourself like a sheep or a cattle, nobody's gonna. I can't think of a nation that would do business in good faith with somebody that they knew had no representation. That would
True.
be a hard sell. You know what I'm saying? That's a hard sell. I'm providing
True.
goods and services to you. There's nobody behind you. I got to take you just at face value. You know, that's the famous Jay-Z quote. We don't believe you. You need more people.
Right.
And that's what it
Right.
comes down to nationality. We just don't believe you. So you got more people
Right.
to you don't have a nice day.
So so let me ask you about like other parts, other regions. So like let's say West African.
Right.
What is your understanding of West Africans' perception of nationality?
A lot of
If
what a lot of what their perceptions of nationality came from was through the colonial period when you saw the Portuguese come in and introduce their notions of statehood because their notion of a city state was different from what we see expressed now in a contemporary sense with Europeans. So much of what we see in Western Africa was a byproduct directly of the colonial period. And primary to that, you have to remember you had several hundred years of Arab oppression. So we had, you had the transatlantic slave trade, but you also have the Indian Ocean slave trade, where you had right as you start to see this synthesis. Uh, the book History of West Africa, they talk about this. There's some great. So I have to go get some of the books so I can show you some of these great scholars that talk about that, and they talk about how the notion of the city state and nationality was different from what we see now because they didn't have a chance to come into it naturally. They had more. They had a tribal, more of a. It's hard to explain, more of a family or orientated tribal setup as opposed to the rigid bureaucracy we would see with American, European, and even Arab presence or whatever.
Got you. I got you. So I got some brothers in the chat room, man. Uh, I'm gonna get back. Peace to King L Bay in the building as well. I see you out here. Uh, I got a brother saying more truth, more lies. Now he's saying basically, if you were born in the United States, you're American. Enough
Yeah. Not
said.
African American, not white American, not black American, American. He's right. You're American.
Right, right. Moorish and Moor are not a nationality. Right. We, understand that. Being a Moor does not give you a nationality, uh, even though it's been projected as that. But you're right. It's not a nationality. But, the Moorish paradigm, it does teach you about nationality in a sense. It gives you a particular understanding of nationality, but it has to be more developed with that when you become a Moor. So I do understand that. Uh, with my brother Moorish Society of Tribes, y'all subscribe to Moorish Society of Tribes. This is our other page basically. Um, King El Bay is basically on that page, but he was saying here, what did he say? Uh, Nationality means nothing without being industrial, and so big ups to that. I do understand that, man. Appreciate the vibe on it. Now, I wanted to ask you another question, though, brother, before we get into anything else. When we talk about this whole black thing and the color, what do you think Rome and Greek thought about nationality and race in regards to us?
But I think, from what I understand, originally their racial connotations weren't heavy because you see a period where your prototypical Greeks weren't this pure pale white. So I think you see an evolution when you start when Greek and Rome start to set their eyes on the greatness and what's being produced by the classical African civilizations, as they saw more of a formulation of us versus them and maintaining our standards, you start to see more of a racialized outlook and everything. Even if when you look at the Ptolemies, at one point you would see some of these Greek missionaries, they had no problem venerating Aset. They had no problem venerating Het Haru and things of this nature. And under the Ptolemies, you start seeing more and more of a tightening down and a formulation of a racial identity. Not that they didn't have that to begin with, but as more the Europeans start to see their identity, their national standards, their view of where they wanted to move into the future, you start seeing more and more racial constructs being set up and everything. But in your classical
Got
interactions, you don't see this harsh, rigid, well-defined racial class hierarchy like what you see with Jim Crow and things of this nature. It wasn't as intense and defined or whatever.
right. Me personally, I always feel like the racial thing started with Catholicism. I feel like when Catholicism came in the
Mm-hmm.
scene, they started labeling, nations started labeling people Negro, and
Right.
they're the ones that brought racism. If you're not a Christian, which was known, Christians were known to be white, and so when they used the term Christian, it was white. So it was like anything that wasn't Christian, aka white, were heathen. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of that comes out of that time period as well, man. Uh, I got a little thing going on here, right here. Morris, he
Oh,
said now, like, but now he said Moore is a nationality, right, right, right. So I don't know where the other brother, more truth, more lies. If you still on here, he's calling you out, man. He's saying that it is a nationality and uh, that race and ethnicity is. What do you say? Race and ethnicity is more. So you gonna have to explain that, brother. I wish you're gonna have to type that in and explain that for me, man. But while you do that, I wanted you to get back on something more about your book. Now, this new book that you got, it's called what again?
Oh, this is the book is called. I don't know if you can see it. Oh man,
Yeah, put it up.
can you see it? It's
Yeah.
called "The Ancestors
Okay.
Surround Us." So it's
Okay.
ancestors surround us, African philosophy and methodology.
Mm, mm. So I want you to get more into the book. Now I know we talked about nationality and whatnot, that which was part of your book, but I know that you went into some other things. So could you kind of go into some other parts of your book that you
Oh
want to
yeah, cool.
explain?
Yeah, definitely. I'll go through it so I can stay. Let's see where some chapters to give a.
Y'all please like this video, share, and please subscribe. Hit the notification bell so that you can get all these videos. Like I said, Amen Maat Ra is going to be, participating on more videos hopefully in the future. So we're
Oh
going to
yeah,
have a
no
lot
doubt.
more subject matter. So most definitely. But go
No
ahead,
doubt.
man. You got it.
So I'll just go through the chapter list and give just a quick breakdown. So in chapter 1, it's called the Medu script and the Lucere Afro-Asiatic language phylum. The first chapter, I started breaking down how Afro-Asiatic was created, and I deal with what us as African citizens in Kemet, how we had to interact with Asiatics, because a lot of times in a lot of cultures we are told that we as African people are Afro-Asiatic, and I explain systematically why that's a misnomer, why there's actually no Afro-Asiatic language family, it's a misnomer, and I go through all of that, and then I also go through our interactions with the Asiatics and interracial peoples, and how we came to look at them. So some of what I pick up on in this chapter is this: if you're familiar with destruction of Black civilization, and that section where I deal with the Asiatics, I pick up where he left off with destruction of Black civilization, with our interactions with Semitic peoples and things. So chapter 2, I give a breakdown of the importance of comparative linguistics, comparing Kemet with living African language, how you go about it, the methods, how to do it, great sources of other African linguists that can give you the foundation for the understanding of comparative linguistics. Chapter 3, I break down Kemet, like what it means and why it's not a reference to being a member of the Black race, why it's not a reference to Black skin, and why our ancestors did not identify themselves like that. So chapter 4 is the second analysis of Kemet, and I provide more answers as opposed to just writing about, okay, it has nothing to do with identifying yourself as a Negro or colored. Well, what does it refer to that is important to nation building? So I get into science, engineering, hydrology, what the term actually refers to, and I show primary sources of the type of fields of science that had to come together to start nation building and everything. So that's important. I get into a lot of engineering principles and things like that, building principle, because when we talk about water, you have to start understanding the actual science and the hydraulic engineers and Kemet and their approach to irrigation and things of this nature. So I get into all of that and everything. Let's see here. Chapter 5, I focus on
I
the
got you.
goddess Ma'at. So, chapter 5 is Ma'at, the balancing agent of traditional African religion. So, I start off breaking down what the actual name Ma'at means, its origins, the actual linguistic boundaries, like far as like how wide the spectrum of meaning of the term Ma'at is, and then after that, I jump off into actual living African traditions that still use the term Ma'at, and how Ma'at is an
Okay.
operational term in traditional African cultures, in particular like Eastern Africa. I get into tribes that actually, even within the hierarchy of their military structure, how they use the term Ma'at for like cells within the military, and how they're supposed to be interconnected, brotherly supporting factions, like how within the Navy you would have Navy SEALs and various hierarchies. And I get into how the term Ma'at is literally still used in these living traditions in Africa or whatever. So that I go through several major tribes that still use the term, and a lot of the key defining terms of Kemet. Kemet Medu Neter is not technically a dead language. You still have living cultures. The Yoruba, the actual Yoruba language, is genetically related to the Medu Neter, meaning at one point, what you call Yoruba was once a dialect, a spoken dialect of the Medu Neter script. Or should I say, well,
That's
because
heavy.
Medu
That's
Neter is a
heavy.
right. You know,
That's heavy, bro. That's heavy right there, man.
and we start showing it. I give
Oh man.
linguistic comparisons. I got linguistic charts to show you the terms how they're literally the same, or it's the inverse. Because when you speak Medu Neter or whatever, a lot of times, say like if we use the word, we're going to pretend the word running was ancient Egyptian. So the suffix ing, the act of currently doing something or whatever, when it goes to a different African language, instead of being a suffix, it would be a prefix. So sometimes that's why words, they don't look the same, but what became a prefix in Medu Neter became a suffix in Yoruba, or just certain consonants switched because they didn't pronounce their words like that. So you have two phases. You got the actual Medu Neter script. So when we say Sesh Medu Neter, that's the written language of Kemet. However, the actual spoken language, the living language that the people use, is called Rani Kemet. So there's two different things. You had what the educated class used, the Seshu, the scribes, they dealt with Medu Neter, Sesh Medu Neter, which is the written language, but the act, which
Right.
is just the script. That's but the actual spoken language is Rainy Kemet, Ra Ni Kemet, the voice of Kemet. You know, with it, and it's pretty deep. That gives you the flexibility because you start to see all the various other African dialects of African tribes that were coexisting with them. So when you say the word Ronnie Kemet, there was at least 3 to 4 dialects of Ronnie Kemet because they were spoken by different African tribes that had coalesced and formed. And as these tribes migrated and moved out, some of them you call Yoruba. Other groups you might call Kalenjin. I get into that. I go into like several tribes because a lot of times there's there's this concerted effort by some researchers to say that West Africa has no historical connection, no archaeological connection, or any linguistic connection to Pharaonic Kemet. It's just completely false. We can go through the languages and show how a lot of your traditional pre-colonial African, West African language, tropical West Africa, they not only carry on the language, they carry on the traditions, the rituals. So, like the what's a famous ritual in Kemet? The opening of the mouth ritual in Kemet, where when the deceased is dead, they do a
Yeah.
specific ritual to symbolically open their mouth and reanimate the representation of the body so it can be a vessel for the spirit, for ancestors and people to interact with and ask and petition for help. You see that same
Gotcha.
tradition in Nigeria. The same reenactment that you see in Kemet, I can show you in Nigeria with the Bimbe Nyombe tradition that nobody's talking about this. So the exact same rituals that the priests were doing, we can go into West Africa and see the same priestly tradition, the same priestly attire. And I go into that in the later chapters. I start going into how a lot of your foundation, because in the front end of the book is very scholarly. It gets meticulous because it's linguistics, science, history, but then the back end is all spiritual. So I get into traditions that where when you look at the collective pantheon of Vodun, I get into some very ancient rituals and pilgrimage sites that people aren't talking about for Voodoo that literally play on the symbology that you see directly in Kemet. And I explain the terms. I show you the hieroglyphs. I can show you that in Voodoo, when you go to certain ritual pilgrimages to do rituals in Voodoo, and you see how the altar is set up, you see how the ritual is set up. I can show you old pharaonic hieroglyphs, and you can literally see that whoever did this ritual in West Africa was literally looking at the glyphs, and the ritual, the altar, is a reenactment of the glyphs that they saw on the temple wall. It's laid out the exact same way. The same primary focus for ritual and ancestor veneration, because I didn't want to ruin all the book or whatever, because I think there's some
Right.
information that a lot of people practice in Vodun, they have no idea. I can actually show them some glyph work and primary source 4,000 years before you hear of a Yoruba people, because you know that term, the Yoruba, they didn't call themselves a Yoruba. That's just a concept. Even when we say the term Bantu languages, that's a European classification. You know, although that term exists, the term Bantu exists in Kemet. They identify themselves as Intu. This is a whole nother book I'm going to work on or whatever, where I show the West African mentality, that like a lot of West African principles are just, it's just a carrying on of the tradition of Kemet, the terms, everything or whatever.
I got you. I got you. So I want to ask you, man. That's heavy, man. That's real heavy, right? Heavy. Um, I want to ask you about Coptic. The Coptic language is how does that relate to
Well,
ancient
Coptic,
Egyptian
the
language?
Coptic is tricky because I get on America. I should have put. And it's great you asked that because I got a whole section on Coptic. But to keep it simple, Coptic is its own separate language. It's not Medu Neter. Coptic is more or less
Okay.
Demotic, which is more of a Greek Greco-Roman hybrid. It's part of the tree that Medu Neter is on, but Coptic itself is a totally different branch. Matter of fact, let me pull up for some good sources. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see here. Let's see if I can bring something up to share to the.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you on there. Add to stream.
Let's see
Yeah,
here.
man, this is a great show, bro. This is a great show, y'all. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, man. We're
So
becoming
so when
hard
we
with this information.
So when we look at Coptic, you're looking at written Coptic as a written script. Written Coptic is five dialects. So when you talk about Coptic, there's five totally different dialects, which differ mainly in geographic conventions. You know, most notably is the Southern Saitic dialect. So the Southern Saitic dialect, the main classical dialect, when we say Coptic, that's the main classical dialect, is that Southern Saitic dialect, and also the Northern Boric dialect, currently used in Coptic church services. So it's liturgical. A lot of the pastors and things in the Coptic church services, they use it. So we got to remember, Coptic is a separate African language from Middle Egyptian, and it's not a continuation. So when you look at Middle Egyptian, you're looking at 2000 BC to about the 18th dynasty, and Coptic came from two different branches of the same language family. So Coptic is basically the name given to a separate language that is very closely related to Demotic. So Demotic is more of a Greek script, a Greek fusion with Medu Neter or whatever. And then that
Okay.
later became like almost like a cursive like script. So Coptic, so essentially when we look at Coptic, Coptic appeared at the end of the first century AD, and it was spoken for almost 1,000 years after its creation. So Coptic is a descendant of both Demotic and Greek writing. So that's one thing we have to be, the principle, the foundation is Kemet, but it's a descendant of both Demotic and the Greek writings. So the Greeks came in and brought their philosophy, their ideology, their approach to grammar and literature, and they merged it and you get Coptic. Although it's important to note that Greek script derives from both. So even though I'm saying this, the actual Greek script it came from Kemet too, but it's
Okay,
still
right.
coming from a Eurocentric purview though.
I
So,
got you.
so although it's important to note that the Greek script derives from both the Demotic and Proto-Saharan, right? A lot of your scholars are talking about this. Like even in a lot of your college professors, you can go to the UCLA, believe it or not. There's a college professor, Christopher Ehret, in his article titled "Language and History" in the Book of African Languages. It's like the introduction or whatever. Cambridge University, they produce a lot of this or whatever, and it talks about, it goes in a form that how the language changed with Coptic and how it's people as it mutated start to just associate it strictly as a literal extension of the original Medu Neter, but it's
Hmm.
more Greek influenced.
Interesting. See, that's good to know, man. Because they often try to say that it's basically a continuation of the Kemetic, you know, writings or the Medu Neter. So it's very interesting that you kind of put that in that light like that, man. That's
Yeah,
good. That's good information.
yeah, because Christopher Ehret, he talks about, there's a book about it that talks about Coptic and how it's not actually a continuation, and that's the book Christopher Ehret did, EHRIT. I'm sorry, it's called Language and History, and like I said, it's from is a compilation that he put in there or whatever from the African languages, an introduction. I have this book, by the way, some of these texts,
Okay.
most of these texts or whatever. So, but yeah, but for some reason, Coptic has always been lumped in as literal, the next phase of Middle Egyptian. But the Greeks came in and merged and created that hybrid language or whatever. Because you know the Coptic Church had one foot in Kemet, and then it had one foot in the European Catholic Christian Church or whatever. It had one foot in,
Right.
one foot with Jesus, one foot with Kemet, just to keep it simple.
I got you, man. I got you. Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of Coptic stuff lately, so I'm glad that you made that clarity as well. So, what else is it in your book that you wanted to touch on, or
Let's
if
see.
anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Oh, well, let's see. Let me go. I didn't
Man,
look before I get
it's been
lost.
heavy, man. It's been heavy. It's been heavy too, bro. Y'all, if for y'all that came in late, man, y'all done missed the show, man. I gotta go back and watch this, man. This is good stuff, man. We really dropped a lot of stuff in this
Yes,
in this
because yeah, because these are
in
all
this.
different. Each chapter is a different. Because the way I wrote the book, it's interconnected, but each chapter literally stands on its own. So it's based off of what field of research. Because you could get it, you could buy my book and read chapter 4 first if you wanted to learn more about Ma'at and what it actually means as a principle in nationality, in organizing a military, organizing a nation, organizing family principles or whatever. You could do that. Another section in my book, I show how the traditions of Kemet and some of the concepts also influence. I go into cultures in the Central Africa and in their spiritual traditions and rituals. So you have, although for some reason, this particular spiritual object has been crossed in with voodoo or whatever because it appears to have nails driven in it. So I have a chapter where I discuss the origin of Nikisi. That is the title. So I focus on the origins of Nikisi and how our ancestors influenced that, the representation of what Nikisi became, and like in Central Africa and things of this nature. So each book, each chapter, I'm sorry, it fluctuates. So the first few chapters are more hardcore, intellectual. Then I get into the spiritual. So it's really all about what you want. But in this particular chapter 6, it's called Shuet Necher. Shuet Necher is basically, it means sacred figure. It's the indigenous image of God. So I show from Kemet how other indigenous peoples in Africa constructed their image of God. And when they do spiritual rituals to interact with ancestors, I show you how the Medu Neter script, how the pictographs, how later when other African tribes migrated out of Africa, I show how just them visually looking at those glyphs inspired how they constructed their deities. When they do their rituals to interact with ancestors or to serve as a representation for a spirit to inhabit so they can ask questions or make petitions or whatever, I show how the influence from Kemet came to create that. In my future book, I plan on showing you where the actual term and concept for Orisha came from, and you'd be amazed at that. How that's not their term or concept. Like, right, the Marisha, we can go deep with that. We can also get into like where the actual concept and term of the name Ogun came from several thousand years before you heard the name Ogun. I can show you Ogun. I can show you Ogun. I can show you the actual consonant structure, the primary consonantal sequence that form Ogun, and we can show you that and show you how and the primary different variation spellings of what became Ogun. I can show you that, like as you go through the traditions and the primary descriptors and attributes of what Ogun is, as we go through Medu Neter or whatever, and the original terms, I can show you how they looked and constructed that and did that. And we can line the terms up and show you step by step how once you migrate from your motherland, you can go to another one and construct another connective pantheon of deities so you can venerate ancestors and construct rituals and do divination. Because in that book, I'm going to show, I'm going to break down, I'm also going to break down where Ifa came from, how the actual divination system, they inherited that. They didn't create that. So we and the next project I plan on doing, I plan on having fun. I'm going to be deep in West Africa. We're going to deal with Ifa. We're going to deal with Ifa divination. We're gonna have to start spending time with Ogun and you know what I'm saying, the
Yes, sir.
Arishas and
Yes, sir.
everything. So that's
Yes,
gonna be
sir.
a fun
Yes, sir.
project. That's gonna be a real fun project. And other African tribes and Vudan and just what we call collectively as Vudan or whatever. We're gonna show
Right.
how where those concepts, when you do a Vodan ritual and you're doing a specific sacrifice, we're gonna show you where that concept comes from. Because like a lot of times people demonize blood sacrifice. And I've had people argument, like I've had people that started studying Vodan, they didn't like it because they started seeing the animal sacrifice. Even in this book that I did, I touch on that and I showed you that our ancestors sacrificed them chickens too. In Kemet,
Right.
they sacrificed them chickens. You were going to offer a blood sacrifice, not necessarily human sacrifice or whatever. But I showed the importance of blood sacrifice, how that never changed. A lot of your foundational principles to interact with deity and to conduct divination properly, you see that. For some reason, this isn't incorporated into the actual discussions that we see to really move things forward. And you know, and it's sad, but I think it's about time that we start discussing like where did Ifa really come from? When you say the term Orisha, where did the word Orisha come from? What etymology speaking, what did somebody else have this concept before? What does it actually mean? So we get into that and we started showing you like what Orisha meant in comparative linguistics, older pre-colonial African languages that break down what the word more fully means in an indigenous language, because that's a very important part of studies is comparative linguistics. That becomes extremely important, being able to, because you can confirm a lot of your hypothesis with comparative linguistics by, if you don't understand one thing in Kemet, you can go to another living language. If you can establish sound correspondences, sound laws, meaning laws, phonology, morphology, syntax, and you can link those up systematically, you can start to understand or qualify or disqualify certain hypotheses you have. So if you want to say, was Ogun in another African tradition that existed thousands of years, through comparative linguistics, you can help establish certain commonalities based on the semantics, the terms, and their actual relation by establishing an actual cohesive relationship. based off of reoccurring sound correspondences. That's a technical term, because a lot of times when people say comparative linguistics, they don't abide by any scientific corresponding sound laws. Meaning, okay, well, the letter J in my language turns into the letter C in your language. So
Right.
CAG would be CAG in your language. And we start setting up sound laws like that. There are actual mathematical sound laws like that. And our great African scholars, one I had the honor of working with, let's say, Obing is a great one. Mubabinge Balolo. You have a lot of great African scholars. Asar Imhotep, he's another great scholar. With the Amen Ra squad and things of this nature. You have a lot of great scholars putting in the work. It's just not circulating as much as we should. Now, outside of America, these texts are being consumed in Europe and all of these things or whatever. But I think it's time that we introduce some of this research, names and sources, so people can do their own research. They can trace back these steps and not take anything at face value for what I say. You know, you can do your own research, but I provide the groundwork, the methodology, the sources, the authors who are doing it, so you can get a well-rounded picture.
Most definitely, man. Most definitely, man. Hey, man, you've been dropping jewels, man. You've been dropping these jewels on God. So, man, I'm so happy. You know, I've been glad that we finally linked up and was able to get on this, man. Y'all, we got a lot to cover. We gonna top it for tonight, but overall, we got a lot to cover. So we just getting started on all this, right? So but I think we about done. Is there anything else that you wanted to like talk about before we finish
Oh
up
no,
and
I'll be
wrap it up?
back again, brother. I'll be back again. This is definitely an honor. First and foremost, I want to thank you for having me on your platform. I want to thank you for all the help you've given me coming up. You've shared a lot of information that was very important to who I became as a researcher, as an author. You never hid anything from me. Whatever information and research I did, you always shared with me. And that made me a better person. So I want to thank you for putting me in a position, helping me become an author. You brought the idea to, you brought me into the fold on play like, brother, you always run off at the mouth. Why don't you jot it down? Why don't you do something? Why don't you do something with it? And I gotta thank you for that. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? I gotta give you your flowers while you're still here to get them.
I appreciate it, man. Most definitely. I've always, you've always been an intellectual person, man, and always, we've always connected. And like I said, we spiritual students together. We come up through a lot of the same things. So, uh, I'm just, I'm glad to have you around, brother. You helped me out. You helped me grow. So, peace to you in that way as well, man. Um, and peace to everybody out here who watched. Like I said, please like, subscribe, get the notification bell, and watch some of our old videos. And y'all watch this. My man, check out his book. I got it here. We got it on the screen. Y'all can go to Amazon, get this book, man, and get all the books so y'all can get this knowledge, man. Because we dropping these jewels everywhere you go. So, with that being said, man, I'm out, man. So it's Tutanana.
Peace.
Peace.
Shimmy Mahotep.